right, we are live on YouTube. Welcome everyone to Outreach Noah Studies tonight. How are you doing, Ronald?
I'm doing well, Terry, and
You-
I'm just tuning in now to the live stream.
oh, there you go.
My 30-second delay. There we
Oh,
go.
your 30-second delay. I forgot about that. How you doing, Janice?
I'm doing well,
I've
thank you,
just
Terry.
the YouTube channel wasn't on pause. One thing I did forget tonight.
Oh,
I was getting feedback. I don't know if you were.
oh no, I wasn't.
Yeah, I was getting a total echo of what was said. Yeah, so welcome everybody. Welcome to Janice in the Zoom room tonight. We're a bit empty here tonight.
Yeah, we
Uh,
got Veronica. She's still out traveling. I didn't get a chance to ask her if she'd made it up to her mom's yet. Her mom lives up in Canada, and she's going to be going to visit her. So she's been driving up there, and I think the winds have been really rough up there. She's pulling that camper. It's probably wore her out. So
yeah,
she's taking a break tonight.
she did say it would be about 6 days from when she left South Dakota. So she'll be close, if not there. And
Right.
welcome to Linda, who's just joined us in the Zoom room. So this
Linda?
recording will be uploaded to Power Faith Radio in the next day or so when I'll get it to Scotty, hopefully this evening, my time, tomorrow morning, your time. And we're still waiting on Scotty to put up a video of the presentation of the electric wheelchair to Danielle. He sent me a couple of shorts. I think he's going to piece a few different shootings together for it. But
Right.
yes, she looked really happy about it.
That's
they were going
good.
to do a picnic, but the weather was a bit iffy, so they decided to go to a restaurant instead. But yeah, she's got the chair and she looked quite chuffed.
Good. She's got the chair, and that's good.
Yeah, give her a lot more independence.
Okay, Ronald, we getting anything in through our email?
No, and I was just getting ready to say if you have anything you want to comment on or questions for us, just email us at outreachnoah@gmail.com.
Yeah, we've been having some pretty good studies here lately in Genesis chapter 4, and like I said, 4-7 is really looking forward to that. And then we're going to be moving into 5 and 6, getting into Noah here pretty soon. But tonight we're going to continue. Going to be doing verses 15 through, I believe, 17. Because actually even in the Chumash it's got 18 through 22 paired up together, and it's in all of it. I'll check that out this next week. And but tonight it'll be Genesis chapter 4, verses 15 through 17. Ronald, anything else we may need to get into before we get started?
No, I think we can just get straight into it tonight.
All right. I was trying to think myself if there's anything. I know I'll probably make this announcement again, but not this next Wednesday, but the next Wednesday we won't be having class. I won't be available. I haven't moved my calendar yet, but I'll let everybody know next class date and everything on that. So, going to be taking some needed time off from work, my wife and I. So we got some stuff planned to do. All right, Genesis chapter 15. Last week we ended with discussing Cain's we went through 12 through 14, and we was talking about how the ground would no longer yield its produce to Cain, and part of the punishment that he was going through. Tonight we're going to continue a little bit about that. In 15 it says, and God said about him, therefore anyone who would kill Cain, revenge is taken on him sevenfold. Then God put a mark on Cain so that whoever would find him would not kill him. And what Rabbi Hirsch says, and again, we're using the Rabbi Hirsch's Chumash, and what Rabbi Hirsch said here is really interesting because in his translation, he says, "And God said about him." He goes, "The Scripture does not say to him that God spoke to him. It says that God said concerning him, about him. God did not reply to Cain, but in regards to Cain." And the word punishment there that's mentioned in the word punishment that's generally translated as punishment, where he has revenge here. And another word. Yeah, he's got that. He's talking about the word punishment means it denotes from its root word the raising up of justice trampled underfoot, or the raising up of a downtrodden person. He goes on, Rabbi Hirsch says, it's impossible to revive the victim and restore him to life, but it is possible to redress the blow that has been dealt to justice and to restore justice to its rightful place. In Leviticus 19, verse 18, when God was giving Israel instructions about not taking revenge and not holding grudges, he says, you must not take a revenge for the wrong that has been done to you, but you should help redress the wrong done to others. And I kind of looked up Rabbi Hirsch's phrase here, but you should help redress the wrong. And it says here that redressing a wrong that is done to others involves taking active steps to correct an error, to compensate for damage, to mend an unjust situation. It is a formal, often moral obligation that moves beyond a simple apology to actively setting things right. So we find it's interesting here that what Rabbi Hirsch was talking about here, it says, therefore, anyone who would kill Cain, revenge is taken on him sevenfold. And he's talking about here, and when he gets into it, the revenge or the punishment is on Cain, not the one who was to kill him. We're going to see that here in just a moment. It says, our verse means as follows. Therefore, because Cain's condition is unbearable, let anyone who would kill Cain to avenge the blood of Havel or Abel hear this. Someone wanted to come and, want to kill Cain for killing his brother. I found this really interesting because this is what God is actually saying in this passage. Allowing Cain to live is a punishment 7 times more severe than death. How many times we've wanted someone, their life to be taken because they had killed someone. And rightfully it could be done. But what's sad in our nations today is they don't really punish anyone It's not a punishment putting them behind bars and giving them 3 meals a day and the TV. And, that's not punishment. The punishment that God put on Cain was 7 times worse than death. What if our most hardened criminals, what if there was a system of putting something on them that was worse than death instead of just death penalty? Now, don't get me wrong, the death penalty, which is part of God's, the way he rules things and part of his government, when certain sins are committed, you become liable for death. And back in the day, it was also a way of ridding evil from the community. You got rid of it. That's the problem today is that all the evil that happens gets turned loose back in the community instead of taken away. And I mean, the example we see here with God is that one of the forms of punishment is exile. We learned that over the last couple of weeks, that he was a wanderer and a wanderer in exile. And we're going to see something else about exile here in a minute. It's pretty interesting. But anyhow, allowing Cain to live in his punishment was 7 times more severe than death. Through Cain's life, Abel will be avenged. The blood that was spilled will be atoned sevenfold. It says, in the subject of the punishment would then be Abel. And since Abel is not mentioned by name, the subject might well be just the murder. The murder is avenged sevenfold. However, we do not find we do find one incident in Joshua chapter 10:13, where the object of the punishment is not the victim, but the criminal. Here too, the subject of the punishment is Cain. And where it says, and he placed upon him a sign. This has all been this is one of those areas where a lot of people's talked about this across all different kinds of belief systems that has some form of the Hebrew scriptures. I always like to talk about the sign. What was the mark, the mark of Cain? What was his sign, The sages of Israel in Bereishis Rabbah, which is one of their sacred writings, interpret the verse to mean that he had made a sign or a mark for Cain. They differ as to the nature of the mark, the issue being whether Cain repented, because there is some that talks about Cain repented, or remained defiant. So there is discussion. Did he repent or did he remain defiant? They also find another interpretation within the Midrash that God made Cain himself into a sign. That God made Cain himself as a sign and a warning for murderers. So whatever God marked on him, whether it was just a mark or whether he himself became the mark, it was a warning against murder. It says, however, even without, this support, because it's discussion about the mark, whether it was a mark or if Cain himself was made into a mark, a warning against murder. It says, because Cain's condition is so oppressive, let everyone who would kill Cain hear this. revenge will be taken on him sevenfold. And so God decreed upon Cain a life that will serve as a sign and a warning. So whoever saw Cain seen not only a sign of what he had done, but a warning: you don't do what he did. Henceforth, no one who finds him will kill him. So that means, if you think about it, Cain was probably trying to find someone to end his misery, but he couldn't. So there it was like he was looking for death, but death was fleeing him. He goes, henceforth, no one who finds him will kill him, for everyone knows that Cain's life serves as a warning to all murderers, more than would his death. His death would not have said anything. You know, it would have been over, it would have been done, it would have been impactful, but the event would have been forgotten. But Cain lived a life of many years, and in that life, he had a sevenfold punishment that was continually a warning signal to everyone he came in contact with, every village he came across, every person he came across. He was a sign: do not commit murder. Also in Bereishis Rabbah, the sages says he not only left the place. I'm going to get through this a little quicker than I expected tonight as I was going through. He said he not only left the place of God's presence, but abandoned his whole relationship with God and turned his back on God's word. Because you remember what we was talking about, the conversation with Cain. God said this turning on him was only temporary, but he could fix it. God told him he could fix this, and things would go back to normal. But he turned his back on that. And then when he killed Abel, he's like, he sealed it. You know, his envy, because we read that his envy rose up within him, and his envy caused him to commit murder. And I read somewhere else that is interesting that Cain, there's a good chance that Cain did not know what he was going to do would kill his brother, because nobody had been killed yet. He hit him with a rock. He was going to hurt him. There's some of the sages that I have read that his intent was to inflict him, to hurt him. But instead he murdered him. And because this had not happened yet, murder wasn't even in his mind, you know, to kill. And so that is another discussion that I've come across that was really interesting. But he turned his back. He left the place of God's presence. He abandoned the relationship with God and turned his back on God's word, that he could fix it, and things could go back to normal. But remember, Cain means acquisition. And so this negative sense of wanting to acquire and the envy that built up within him drove him to this. He allowed this to fester. Rabbi Hirsch goes on and says, banishment from man and earth, he sought to build for himself an independent life. Although man was banished from paradise, he still stood in the presence. It says, although man was banished from paradise, he still stood in God's presence. The presence of God did not leave Adam and Eve when they were banished from the garden. They still stood in his presence. Cain, however, because of his crime and subsequent behavior, left this relationship and went forth away from the presence of God. You see what I'm saying? Even though Adam and Eve messed up and they got kicked out of the garden, Adam going back to where he already knew, the outside world, because he was taken into the garden. But Eve, it was new. It was a new neighborhood. She'd never been there before. And so they both were experiencing different things, but yet they were still in the presence of God. They never walked away from the presence of God in the actions of being exiled out of the garden. Cain, however, he left his relationship and the presence of God by his own free choice because of his actions, his behavior. Rabbi Hirsch goes on and says, earlier when we were talking about when Adam and Eve was the situation in the garden, when says, earlier we saw that the Shekinah departed from man to the west. It's talking about in the garden. Remember the sound, they heard the sound of God. It was departing to the west. And he's going to get into this. This is really interesting right here. It says, and we saw that the Shekinah departed from man to the west. In our verse, Cain withdraws to the east. In verse 16, it says, and Cain went forth from before God's countenance and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. So he went forth from God's countenance, from his presence, and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And so Rabbi Hirsch is talking about here that when Shekinah departed from man, it went to the west. Remember, if you go back to our classes when we were talking about Adam and Eve, when they had eaten of the fruit and, they were confessing that they were naked and all of that. And it says they heard the voice of God moving, and it says it's moving to the west. It was moving westward. But here, Cain, in his withdrawing from the countenance of God, withdraws to the east of Eden. He withdrew to the east. In ever increasing alienation from God. Now, this moving to the east is very interesting. I had not caught this before until I was studying these passages. Rabbi Hirsch says this was man's first attempt to establish his life on the basis of his own strength without God. Verse 16, Genesis chapter 4. And Cain went forth from before God's countenance and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Was man's first attempt to establish his life on the basis of his own strength without God's help. He was without God. Kind of this old song coming to my mind, I'm going to do it my way. But this is the first attempt for man to establish himself out of God's presence without God's help. Verse 17 says, and Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Hanok. Cain then became a city builder, and the name of the city, and he named the city after his son, Hanok. Before we get into that, I wanted to read one more section out of before I leave verse 16, because it's going to tie into everything. In Rabbi Soloveitchik's Chumash, on verse 16, he had some more information that I wanted to bring. I overread my note there. I wanted to come back to this. It says, and Cain went forth from before the land, and he dwelt in the land of wanderers to the east of Eden. Rabbi Soloveitchik says, Cain settled east of Eden. When he looked upon Eden, his promised land, he faced westward toward the horizon in the direction of the setting sun. Similar, when Moses climbed the mountain, remember Moses didn't get to go into the land. So Moses is doing a very similar situation here. Similarly, when Moses climbed the mountain to look upon the land of Israel, he faced westward. The sin of Cain caused him to go to the east. The sin of Moses kept him in the east. It says, so similarly, when Moses climbed the mountain, he looked upon the land of Israel facing westward. The word east has an additional connotation of early or ancient. From the peaks of the ancient mountains, Deuteronomy 33:15. I wanted to take some time right here, Ronald, because this is really interesting.
Yeah.
The direction of man's progress from ancient times until this very day has been westward. Japheth, the son of Noah, when they started settling, they became the Greeks. And it says the tents of Japheth was going to enlarge. It's not just population, but as the sages teaches us, it's in knowledge, it's in the sciences, the medicines, the mathematics, the arts, literature, writing, philosophy, psychiatry. All of that comes from Japheth. Settled Greece, and then it went westward into Europe, and west into the British Isles, and continued west across the ocean to the United States. In the United States, we settled the east coastline. But I just finished a biography on George Washington that was really amazing. Learned some stuff about Georgia boy that I never even heard of, and understood him more as a man, because that's what the direction of this autobiography were done. But he had a westward goal as well. From Mount Vernon, he looked westward to the Ohios. He knew that the nation was going to grow west, and he was trying to establish things in his second presidency that would, guarantee certain things as the nation would grow west. So it's interesting how and Rabbi Soloveitchik says the direction of man's progress from ancient times until this very day has been westward. And that's the direction that the Shekinah, the presence of God from Eden, when Adam and Eve heard it moving, it says it was moving westward. So he goes on, Rabbi Soloveitchik says, the story of civilization is that of the spread of culture from the far Middle East toward Greece to later to Western Europe. Man advances towards the setting sun. thought that was interesting. Got something, Ronald? Any comments there?
No, nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's interesting because I don't
I
quite
never had thought
understand
about
it,
that.
and I don't quite understand it. But yeah,
But
looking
man
westward
has,
towards Israel, so to speak,
yeah.
which means
Right.
Israel's the goal. Bring
Well,
humanity
see,
back to the place.
well, he's going to bring this up, Israel as well. It says, conversely, if one moves eastward, he regresses. So when Cain moved east of Eden, he was going backwards, not forwards. Historically, Israel was exiled. See, Israel was to the west. Remember, they were in the wilderness was in the east. Israel was to the west. Moses was on the mountain looking westward to the land of Israel. He had to stay in the east while the nation crossed Jordan to the west. And it was Moses' sin that kept him in the east. Cain's sin that moved him to the east. And so this is something that I learned brand new when I decided I want to see if Rabbi Soloveitchik had to say about our passages tonight. And then when I read this, I'm like, okay, I got to bring this because this is so good. He goes here. He says, conversely, if one moves eastward, he's regressing. Historically, Israel was exiled to the east, a movement in the direction which represents failure. When they were taken into Syria and into Babylon, that's all east of Israel, and that represented a failure. And I had never thought about that. He goes on and says, repentance represents a return to one's source, a retracing of one's steps. On man's trek westward toward Eden, he stumbled by violating the moral law. He had to go back where he started. Going eastward is going back and starting over. So I thought that was interesting. I wanted to. But it got me to thinking, though. I mean, that's the way his history has shown it. But let's say, right now we are considered the West, and we have the largest amount of Jews that are, outside of the land is in the United States. And for them to go back home, that's going east. But that's where the Holy Land was set up. It was the West. Israel was kind of, like here in the United States, if those are not from here won't understand it. I know Bob will understand when we talk about, the Wild West, the Great West, and you see a lot of old films and reading from the turn of the century back from 1800s and the 1900s, and you hear about people, they were traveling the Oregon Trail and going to Montana and stuff. And they'd talk about, well, I came from back east. They were going westward. And to go back east was to go back home. And for Israel, that will be going back home. It's to the land that was promised. But for them, that is their western home, because they came from the east. For them, complete east would be going back to the wilderness of Sinai. It would be going back to Babylon. It would be going back to Syria. So for them, their western home is Israel, on the bank of the Great Mediterranean, which in one day will encompass parts of Iraq and Syria, because it's the land God gave Abraham. Israel's never occupied the whole territory, but one day they will. It's going to be massive. Okay, verse 17. It does not say that he built a city. It says he became a city builder. With Cain, he began a new enterprise. And there's an aspect about the city we're going to learn here that I had never thought about. And you, Ronald, you're going to get this when, because of what we were talking about, the agricultural, mind, the agricultural person trait, which is not evil. It's just that some people are agricultural, some people are pastoral. It's what we learned when we studied Cain and Abel. But Cain began a new enterprise. The enterprise was called the city. Cain was cut off from the soil. Remember, the soil will no longer unleash its power for him. He was cut off from it. He could no longer grow vegetables. The land no longer supported him. He was forsaken by God and banished from the society of man. What was left for him? He still had himself. He still possessed his mental powers and the skills that were inherent in his personality. The natural result was the city builder. He no longer could go to the soil. You only have one direction. Unlike the countryside, the city is detached from the soil. I had never thought about that. If you think about the great cities, they're detached from the soil. The cities are detached. The small villages aren't. They're not cities. They're still connected to the soil. But a city is detached from the soil, from agriculture. City dwellers support themselves through human resourcefulness. Like me, the job I've got to work for Toyota dealership and the parts has nothing to do with agriculture. It has everything to do with human resourcefulness. Humans built cars. I work in a parts house. It takes parts to build them and to repair them. Has nothing to do with agriculture. It has everything to do with city. It has nothing to do with the soil. It's detached from the soil. Agricultural produce reaches the city where it is converted to meet human needs. Art and industry place upon the produce the imprint of human intelligence. The fields cultivated by the city dweller are his energy, mind, and skill. They are constantly being developed, as will soon be told. In the countryside, the fields are cultivated. This is interesting if you're taking notes. In the countryside, the fields are cultivated. In the city, man is cultivated. It's interesting, isn't it? In the countryside, the fields are cultivated. In the city, man is cultivated. In the city, the slumbering capabilities of man are awakened. Man, as it were, is awakened. Perhaps that is why the city is called yur. It's kind of from the eye, the Hebrew word for eye. It's called an eye, and its root means to be awake. kind of reminds me, think about it. New York City is called the city that never sleeps. It's always awake. This is really interesting. Man flourishes in the city like grass of the earth. Where grass flourishes out in the prairie land, man flourishes in the city. Man is like the grass of the city. This contrast between city and countryside appears also in the later laws. Just talking about it for Israel. The tribe of Levi, which receives no share in the land, is granted Levite cities. A person guilty of manslaughter who is exiled from the holy soil, just as Cain was banished from the whole earth, is exiled to cities. Houses in walled cities are considered as though they were detached from the land. Like movable property, they can be transferred permanently from hand to hand. Accordingly, it is a characteristic that the first city was founded by Cain, who was cut off from the land, thrown back upon his own resources. When his first son was born, he saw the need to provide for the future, and to accomplish this, he had no other way but to become a city builder. So he went from the farm to the city. No longer was fruits and vegetables his produce. It was man. For the city cultivates man. I just find that a really interesting statement. The countryside cultivates, the land, the fruits, the vegetables, but the city cultivates man. It's its resource. Man is the resource of a city, where broccoli is the resource of the farmer, or sheep for the shepherd. Go ahead, Ronald.
Yeah, I'm just trying to piece it all together. I'm thinking cultivating man. Yeah, well, you think of a city, it's full of office blocks and commercial enterprises of trading with the land or the produce, but also cultivating people because it needs employees to run everything and do the purchasing, the distribution, etc. Things like that. So a city's full of thousands of people, 9 to 5, and they're not actually producing any product as such, but they're moving it and the investment, financial investments. So it needs people to do that side of things.
Yes, it's movable property that can be transferred permanently from hand to hand, like you just said.
Yeah. The biggest GDPs in major Western countries these days is non-productive. They're not building anything. They're not making anything. They're just moving things backwards and forwards on paper. And that takes up most of the country's GDP, creates most of a country's GDP, whereas in the past, especially, say, from after World War II through the 50s and that, America became a powerhouse of production. And now it's a powerhouse of moving papers from one computer to another and finances all over the place, but non-productive, which is what's trying to be reversed at the present, to bring the production back in, that the country's actually making something, not shuffling papers and finances.
Isn't it interesting? We can go back almost 6,000 years and we can look at one man and his actions and what it began. And we look at our stuff and it's not changed. Where his resource was men and horses and buggies and whatever. Today we have men, we have vehicles, we have truck lines, we have trains. It's the same, really. I mean, it's just like what King Solomon said, there's nothing new under the sun. We can take probably a city like New York City, Hong Kong, and go back to the large cities, at the time period. We don't know how big the cities were before the flood, but they were probably massive. But we look at them and the only thing that's changed is the names. You hear about those, watch those stories based on, or movies and shows based on true stories. They'll say the events are the same, but only the names have been changed. And the same events that are going on today in our cities have been going on in all cities since Cain built the first one. Because it transferred from cultivating the land to cultivating man. Man became the resource, and it still is the resource. I mean, what does every company have? They have an HR, human resources. It's just amazing just what little bit we have here in these few verses. And you meditate and you ponder, upon them. And we're looking at an ancient story, but yet we're looking at ourselves in a mirror.
The visuals of what we see are the same, are different, but the actions are the same.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I know Ryan Holiday talks a lot about. Marcus Aurelius is always talking about how there's always ugly, evil people. There's always rude people, mean, contriving, deceitful. And there's also good people. And he talks about every generation has these. Nothing is different. We can look upon, Marcus Aurelius, he would look upon the Roman Empire and he would see all the variations of people. And yet, 2,000 years later, we can look across the landscape of whatever nation you're in, and it hasn't changed. The same people is still there. And so it's interesting when we look at humankind and we look at Genesis here and we look at our cities, we look at Cain and resourcing man, all the evils and all the goods, whatever good there is and whatever evil there is, we've harnessed man through the city mentality. I've got a book. It's on my Kindle. It's when I first got my Kindle. I need to power that up and read that book. I wish I had a hard copy of it. When you read this book, you would think you're reading a book that was just published yesterday. But I can't remember the title of it. I had to pull it up and get it charged. But it was copyrighted, I think, in the 1920s. And it was talking about a man who lived in London. It's a story this man was talking about. He was a businessman in London, a suitcase toting, businessman. And he had visited the countryside. I think went out on the country. And he was wanting to change himself. He was wanting to change himself from all the stress and everything that the city had put on him to be successful. He wanted to change himself and go live in the countryside where the air was fresh. And like I said, if you didn't look at the copyright and you just read the story, it sounded like somebody just wrote it from 2026. But yet this was in the 20s that this gentleman who wrote this book was having these thoughts of the damage that the city life had done him. He wanted to just get away from it. After he had visited the countryside, it was just harder to live in the city. And it was really, it's one of those like 99-cent books I bought, when I first got my Kindle. I got me a few of those inexpensive ones. And it's one of those I wish I had a hard copy version of it. I don't know if you can get a hard copy of it. But it matches almost with kind of like what we're talking about tonight. The difference between the city person and the person who lives, on the land, off the land. And Cain lost that. He was the land dweller, and then he became the city dweller. Yes, Janice. You're muted. There we go.
There's a lot of people in New Zealand and probably around the world who have been city people, and they're choosing to live in tiny houses, little wee things, not much bigger than a caravan, and invest their money into a piece of land. I had someone here, a plumber, yesterday, and he has done just that. And he's put a huge greenhouse on it and growing all his own tomatoes and things in the greenhouse and cucumbers, and just has downsized so incredibly with himself and his 2 children, I think, and wife, and have done amazingly. I know this is done over and over, this kind of thing, and it's those people that are wanting to get out of the city and into the countryside, and some of them still keep their jobs, but live in the rural area.
Mm-hmm.
It's all been very interesting, Terry. I've been fascinated by your talk today.
You're getting to know the real Genesis. Man, that sounds like a title of a book right there.
Yeah.
Getting to know the real Genesis. It's amazing.
Mm.
Maybe that's what I should have titled this series, Getting to Know the Real Genesis.
Yeah.
I think that when COVID was around, a lot of change happened when people had to not work in the offices anymore and just work at home and be part of their family and family life, all part of their work. And I think huge changes in people's thinking happened at that time. And for many, I think they've continued to try and keep that. So I think some companies have rulings where you can work at home for 2 days a week and then just come into the office for 3 days a week, something like that. So they have a portion of home life and a portion of office life. So
My
it's
wife and I,
saying,
my wife and I didn't get that experience. Our company and our jobs was considered essential, and we worked our heinies off during that time period when other people. There was a man I know in my department that got laid off and was making more money a week than I was, and I was working 40 45 hours a week, never stopped, never got a break, because we were considered essential. The dealerships were considered essential businesses because we'd service emergency vehicles, like Toyota. There's a lot of businesses in our town that has Toyota vehicles for their company fleets, fleet cars, fleet trucks. And so we were government considered dealerships not just Toyota, but Ford and Chevy and all of them, all the dealerships were considered essential because it was a transportation business that had to be kept up and going. And so there was a lot of us in all these different dealerships that didn't get that break, that COVID break.
Mm.
It went in and on as business as usual, except now we had less people, so we had to work harder.
Mm.
So, but God was good with my wife and I during that time. We bought our house and bought a vehicle during COVID. We'd given up on buying a house. We were wanting to move down to Chattanooga. We'd given up. Every house we went to turned into a bid war and just would price way out of our financial reach. And we actually bought this this home here from a person that we worked with, young couple that got some land from the grandparents, and they were going to build a house. My wife just happened to overhear that they were going to build a house. He said, "You selling it?" "Yeah." "On the market?" "No." We went and had supper with them, and before we got out of the driveway, we decided we was going to buy the house.
Mm.
Now the house, because of COVID, we've gained about $80,000 to $90,000 in equity over what we gave for it.
Mm.
So God was really good with us, even though we didn't get that break, like a lot of people got 2-week breaks. They got to go home. But we didn't. We just kept going on, but did what we could do. God's good. Whether you got to go home or you didn't, he was still good to us. But yeah, tonight, the city builder,
Mm.
farmer used to be, now city builder. We learned some things, not only about his punishment being sevenfold, as though he was a warning to anyone that would commit murder, but he also developed a whole new enterprise that had not existed yet, and which now still exists to this day. Not that there's any more cities being built, and all the rest of them are expanding, but it's the same enterprise that Cain started is still flourishing, almost 6,000 years later.
What would the world look like if that hadn't started?
I was just thinking about that. What if Cain had have stayed connected with God's word? What if he had made repentance at the altar that day, and regained his birthright as Bakor, as firstborn, and things went about as they should have been? How would have history looked? Would there have been a flood?
Would there be a car?
I think technology would have the way I heard a rabbi talking about it one time, that God opens up the door of the universe for technologies to be learned and developed for the benefit of man. Man's the one who turns around and makes it evil. He takes the technology and makes it evil. But everything we have today, even the computers, the mics that we're speaking right here, was the technology wasn't there, 300 years ago. But as man progressed, so does the technology progress. And it should be all used, and it's not. But imagine the day when the Torah flows out of Jerusalem like a mighty river over the earth, when all technology will be used for the benefit of mankind. Where will we be? It's just going to be an amazing time, knowing that, there will be no money or materials spent in making weapons in war. I can see Gene Roddenberry's vision of maybe a society eventually where there is no more poor, there's no more greedy, because every person has what they need, so they only develop themselves and become the best person that they are, and become the most wisest person they are, that they can work in any field if God gives them their minds. Because there's people that have, these minds. I was reading, was it this 12-year-old or something here not too long ago graduated from college with this massive degree. Oh, there's this girl that's over in like Germany. I watched a video on her the other day. She was like 6 years old and she was composing music like Mozart from her mind. It was really, really interesting. But there's a video, I don't remember her name, but I believe she lives in Germany. And she's this little girl that's been able to compose and write her own music that we would compare to Mozart, Beethoven, and all that, and operas. I think it was operas and stuff like that that she's composing, and she was doing this from like an early age. So God has like gifted people, some of these people with these minds that are just not hindered in somewhat. I know when I start trying to think of things, you can feel that hindrance in your mind when you get over your head. I sat and watched a whole movie on quantum physics or show on quantum physics one night because it interested me. And I did understand some of it, but some of it was just so, but I like pushing myself that way. When it comes to sciences, when I can get into some things, I like to push myself to at least taste it a little bit, knowing that I don't have the mathematical skills to do it, but at least the processes that's developed, I enjoy. But that's cultivating humans, not land. So I thought that was interesting. All right, Ronald, we actually made it an hour.
Yeah. Yeah. Very good. I wasn't sure
Any
if you were going to get
questions or
there.
anything on YouTube?
No. Just looking. No, we're clear there. Got a few people here. Thank you for coming.
Missed Ann tonight. Bob, thanks for coming and being with us. There's someone else. Veronica, she said she messaged me and said she wouldn't be here. Go ahead, Bob.
I just said thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming.
Yeah.
Veronica, she's taking a rest, and which I know she's needed because she's been saying driving that truck, pulling that trailer has been wearing her out with the winds.
So next week versus
I know 18 through 22 is grouped together in Rabbi Hirsch's Chumash on the way he's discussing all of them together. We may go beyond that. I just haven't gotten that far yet. This weekend, I'll generally on Saturdays or Sunday mornings, I'll dive. Saturday, I'll probably dive into this. I got a few things to do. Get ready this weekend before we do our little bitty vacation thingy.
So if we get through to 22 next week, then you're off the following week. And then the week you're back, we'll be close to finishing the chapter, depending on the last few verses, how much is involved there.
Have we decided yet on when we might want to take a break from Genesis and get into Jonah for a little while? Or
at the end of this chapter, I think
at the end of chapter 4 before we start 5.
Yeah.
Maybe do a break and get into Jonah. That sounds good.
Was it Jonah or Job you wanted to do?
No, I want to do Jonah. I've done a little bit of Job.
Okay.
That one I would like to get in and tackle. It's pretty deep. Got a lot of commentary in it. But yeah, I think Job would be another good one for us to decipher.
Yeah.
Get into. But we talked about doing Jonah after taking a little bit of a break from Genesis.
Yes. It all ties in anyway. It's the situation, and it's dealing with the Gentiles.
Yeah, and repentance, and it's really, really good. Repentance and forgiveness. And what I like getting into is Jonah the man and the prophet, because I've heard some people speaking on it here recently, non-Torah based teachings, And they messed up with some of the reasons why they say Jonah fled and, got mad at God and all this stuff. I'm like, man, you don't have a clue what was going on. When you're trying to tell a story without knowing the actual story from its own language, Hebrew language, you can make a lot of mistakes. That's why I like that quote from Star Trek Discovery, young Spock and his human sister. His human sister's arguing with him, saying that yes, she understands, she knows Vulcan, and so Spock being Vulcan, he looks at her and says, translation is not the essence of understanding.
Mm.
And when I heard that, I grabbed my book out and I was writing. I said, that's a powerful statement. Translation is not the essence of understanding.
Yes, and it becomes so much harder because you can't really translate Hebrew into English.
Oh, there's
You're
some,
creating a commentary, but you're still losing the depth of what's being said. Even
and
trying to
that's a lot
put
with
it
other
into
languages
English
as well.
vocabulary to explain it. A sentence become 3 paragraphs to give a proper explanation of what's being said.
I've got a Jewish friend of mine that lives in New Jersey. He's a Levite. We talked about the Levites here tonight. He's a Levite, and I messaged him one day. I took a picture of. I was reading something, and I took a picture of this Hebrew word, and I had a basic translation of the word right there that was translated. It was translated into English, but I knew something. There was something else, so I took a picture of this Hebrew word with its English translation, literal translation from it, and I sent it to him. And I said, David, I said, can you help me out with this word? I said, there seems to be more to the story on this word than the word that is translated into English. And he sent me back, no. He said that word is a how did he put it? He said it's a mental concept. What that word actually means, you have to be within the culture of that word to understand what it means, other than a straight English translation of word. He goes, no. He says it's vast. He says it's more than a couple of paragraphs, just that one word. And I'm like, you're kidding me. He goes, no. He said it's a concept. Unless you are familiar with the Hebrew culture, you wouldn't understand the concept. And I'm like, one word? He goes, one word. He said, that's a lot of Hebrew is like that. They're in concepts, dealing with cultures and traditions and knowledge of the ancients, the ancient Hebrews. And it goes, and you can't translate that word into Greek or into Hebrew, into English, into Spanish or whatever. He said, to understand it in its completeness, we would have to sit down and I'd have to teach you about the culture behind it. Kind of like Imuna. I grasp, I'm going to say a good 90%. I'm not going to jump up 90 plus. That'd be too arrogant. Like Imuna. Imuna is translated faith, but it's not the English word faith. It's not. It's just the best word available. And so, but once you start grasping Imuna, and the only reason why I can do it is because I've studied Breslov since 2008. And that's what Rabbi Nuckman taught on, was on Imuna and prayer. All right, Ronald.
Okay, we will draw it to a close. Thank you, Janice, Linda, and Bob for joining us today, and Peter and Joseph and Salvation G8 for joining us on YouTube, and we will be back next week.
Yeah, we'll
And,
be back next week.
and as
The next week
Terry
I
said,
won't be
next
available.
week we're here, and the following week we get a break. And then we'll come back and maybe finish the chapter. If not, it'll be the week after that one again. And then we'll move into Jonah for a period of time.
Hey, Ronald, where can they send us any questions or comments?
To outreachnoah@gmail.com. And locals usually just contact me direct.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah.
Or if you just want to send it to Ronald, it's okay.
Yeah.
He's
if you can find me.
if you can find me, he runs and hides. No, he's
Yeah,
down under there. He'll find him a kangaroo to jump in a pouch.
Okay. So we'll close down now and see you next week. Have a good week,
All right.
everybody, and may you be fully blessed with it.
Yes. Bye-bye.